It's been a year since I played Luocha in terms of in the closed beta. Many things have changed in his kit as well in terms of his form. Some of them got reworked, some of them got buffed as well. But one thing that has remained constant is really his function in a team. And we see that across all characters as well. Final nerfs and buffs in the going to official launch tends to be just balancing the character in terms of the overall ecosystem, so a character doesn't get too overtuned or too underpowered as well. Team composition roughly stays the same, and in this video, we're going to talk about team compositions for Luocha, starting from free-to-play teams with no gacha, adding a little bit of gacha as we go along the video, and towards the end, we'll also be talking about more 5-star characters in a team as well. And the first thing I want to talk about is, I think some of you might be wanting to know, is what differentiates Luocha from the other two healers in the game, Natasha as well as Bailu. Natasha, of course, is a free-to-play character, and Bailu is a standard 5-star that if you do 300 pulls, eventually you have a choice of picking her up as well. Luocha offers a lot more offensive ability compared to the both of them, and he skills off attack. So if you are looking, for example, in terms of DPS check, you need to hit certain damage markers quicker, he definitely is a much more favorable option over the other two. He has a lot of imaginary damage, and currently, as of time of recording, there are only two imaginary characters in the game, Luocha as well as Wilt. So very good amounts of imaginary damage break as well. Offers much more break damage in terms of to the enemy's toughness compared to these other two. And on top of that, other than being an offensive healer, he also has ability to cleanse your characters, and his ultimate also strips enemies buffs as well, making him a very versatile healer. I would say like almost a complete healer in terms of the offensiveness that you want out of your defensive unit as well. His heal doesn't work in a similar fashion from these other two, which are pretty straightforward. There are two parts of his healing. One, the skill, is very similar to Natasha, where you press a button, you heal a character up, you can even cleanse a debuff. But that skill also has a passive mode, where if any character on your team drops below 50% HP, his skill will auto-cast without using skill points. So that makes it pretty important to know as well, since he generally is not as skill point hungry as compared to like Natasha, so that's quite favorable for his role as well. Of course, he has like some turn cooldown, which doesn't make it like every time a character goes below 58% HP, you auto heal them. That'll be quite OP. But that's for his skill. His ultimate ability is just a lot of damage in terms of doing in an AoE fashion, but his other healing comes from his passive, where after he gets a certain stack of his passive buffs that he has, he creates this field around the area, which actually gives your teammates a quote-unquote lifesteal. I say quote-unquote because it scales off with Luocha's attributes rather than the character that's attacking, but every time a character attacks, they heal up a percentage of their HP based on Luocha's attributes as well. So that is basically how it differentiates Luocha from these other two. Far more offensive in a team, but one thing to note is his healing is definitely much slower compared to the other two, as a lot of it in terms of like the AoE healing aspect requires your team members to attack as well. And generally, because this character wants to get his turn order quicker to do more damage, you want him to have a bit more presence in terms of speed as well, so he gets not only energy restoration, does a bit more damage, but gets off his passive cooldowns quicker as well. And I think that the ideal candidate for being a pair to Luocha actually will be a character like Esta. Esta offers a lot of attack buffing, which Luocha wants as well because he skills off attack, and offers that speed in order to give him a little bit more energy restoration in his kit, more damage, as well as getting off his turn counters very quickly as well. Of course, the third slot, in my opinion, that will work really well as a free-to-play composition will be a more defensive unit like Fire MC. One of the issues with Luocha, especially if you're faced with a lot of enemies giving you a lot of firepower, you're getting a lot of hits, his healing is much slower than Natasha and Bailu, and he doesn't have like an emergency AoE panic button where you can press a button, everyone is full HP. He works in the sense that your team has to do some attacking in order to get like some sort of sustain, other than of course his skill. And I think a bit of a secondary sustain character with DPS as well, because Fire MC can be built with a sub DPS potential together with Esta. This team I think works very well, especially if you want a bit more AoE coming from these three characters. The last slot, I'll highly recommend a character, for example like Danheng, who is a more single target offensive unit as well. These two provide a bit more AoE damage, and of course Danheng does the single target damage to break down enemy. I think this will probably be my recommendation in terms of a team composition, in terms of like a total free-to-play, no gacha team composition for Luocha as well. Now, if we were to add a bit more gacha into the mix, I think more options exist. You could, of course, push down Dan Heng in terms of priority and put in Su Sang in terms of the slot number 4 in terms of a single target damage dealer. The reason for this is Su Sang definitely is able to weakness break very quickly, likes attack and speed coming from Asta, but is also relatively independent on her own. Good amount of turn action advanced orders as well. It fits very nicely in this team, offers physical damage as well. I think these two relatively similar in terms of this specific composition, I think is pretty interesting to consider. One of these two, maybe not both together because there's quite a bit of single target damage already. And I think that by and large, these two will remain largely the same for free-to-play options. A lot of people might be considering, for example, Tingyun instead of Asta here, but one thing to note is that Tingyun offers energy restoration and attack buffing, but I think Luocha does want to get off that passive countdown a little bit more, so speed might be a bit more beneficial for him to attack quicker, get his ultimate energy back, as well as get off that passive 50, the cooldown that he has every time he has his autocast of his skill. So those are some things that I will be considering as well in terms of placing Tingyun here. For example, some of you who maybe don't feel as much firepower from the enemy and you want to be a bit more offensive, I think swapping out the defensive fire MC for a more offensive, for example, Herta, you have Serval, you have Qingque. These make pretty good options in terms of giving you more AoE damage as well. This is definitely a solid team, especially if the enemy doesn't have too much firepower. You could of course swap this AoE for a sub DPS in terms of AoE like Fire MC as and when you feel fit in terms of the requirements. Ireland, some of you might be wondering, doesn't really work too well with Luocha, because the moment Ireland uses his skill, drops below a certain HP, he will trigger Luocha's auto heal, which will push him up to above 50% HP or but most of the time, and that actually reduces a lot of his utility because Ireland gets a lot of damage for being at lower life as well. So that's why I don't really like Ireland with Luocha. Okay, and so I think this will be, as you can see, it's very flexible. It works with most generic healer class characters. Luocha is definitely super flexible, and especially after the adjustments that we've seen in his kit, does make him probably the best in class healer, especially if you are running for a DPS, you want to run down a DPS clock and meet certain DPS checks as well. So those are some of my thoughts in terms of the 4 stars. You could of course choose to run an AoE character like Pella also in slot number 3. I think it's fine as well. But now let's go on in terms of many 5-star characters in a particular team. This is when it gets really interesting, and first of all, let me just touch on the one that everyone knows that we have been showcasing already. If you guys have seen on the channel, 1 year ago I showcased the Blade and Luocha team, because this is very effective because Blade will drop below 50% life quite often, and when he's using his skill and stuff like that. So he uses his skill, Luocha auto heals him up, doesn't use any skill points at all, and then he's free to attack and he has life steal in his kit. So very, very strong synergy, the two of them together. I think it's an excellent combination, probably one of the best combination of 2 people combination that I've ever seen, because he also does a huge amount of AoE damage. Luocha also does good amounts of AoE damage. What these two lack definitely will be 2 things: a single target damage dealer as well as a buffer, and it can come in many forms. I think because these two scale very nicely with attack and do like a bit of speed, Asta definitely will be a possible choice here. You could of course run Bronya or Tingyun in terms of slot number 3. I think all of it works pretty fine as well in terms of what you plan to play in slot 3. Of course, you think of your other team and then you can adjust your formation accordingly. But the last slot, definitely I would highly recommend a single target damage dealer. You could run Yanqing, you could run any Han character in this last slot. I think will work very, very fine with Luocha as well. And this is probably the highest recommendation in terms of fun and exploiting both of their abilities. Luocha and Blade, very, very strong combination. Now, a lot of you already know this. You guys can check it out on the channel. I've done a video on Blade X Luocha already as one of the stronger combinations that I've noticed in the past. And I think another one that recently might be much stronger is swapping out Blade for another destruction character like Clara. I think Clara is also really strong because generally she will attack quite a lot from her counter, her follow-up counters, and Luocha actually gives her, in the sense, that sort of life steal. So if she attacks and his passive fail is procced, she will actually be able to so-called life steal up whenever she's attacking the enemy as well. And that 50% heal, since Clara is going to be targeted, that 50% heal can be directed at her, who's going to be taking quite a bit of damage as well. Good amounts of imaginary break damage, cleansing if required, as if she, for example, gets debuffed by the enemy. For example, maybe because she's being targeted so much, if she gets, for example, unable to act, her counters won't work. So it really comes a lot in handy when you have Luocha being able to cleanse her up as and when he needs to as well. So I do think that it's pretty vital in terms of Luocha. There's like similar advantage when you run Natasha together with Clara as well. And other than that, of course, this is outdated. Let's move this out a bit. I think Ting Yun here will be really strong. You know, the buff Clara is in a sense because she generally has very high amounts of attack and she doesn't care too much of speed. So in this sense, Luocha might have a bit of lower speed in this team composition because Clara running with Esther doesn't really see too much value. She really wants to have uptime on her energy restoration as well as doesn't care too much about speed because the most of the damage comes from countering enemies anyway. So I think Ting Yun is really solid here. And in the last slot, definitely you want to consider a single target damage dealer as well if you really want a bit more bursty damage as well. So I think those are like some thoughts to consider as well. You could, of course, instead of running Clara, you could run other AoE DPS characters like Jing Yuan. You could run Himiko in this slot as well. I think all of them generally work fine. He's a very flexible character. You could, of course, run, for example, Kafka here as like AoE DPS if you wanted to. But generally, I think the team composition here for him is quite varied. The logic that you want to follow is Luocha, sustain. You want to go for an AoE here. And you want to go for a single target here. So once you have this like AoE single logic, you most likely will be able to like fit most team comps around him. And slot number 3, I'm going to just talk a bit about this because if not, it's going to be like a super long video in terms of permutation and combinations. I talked about 2 that I really like in terms of Luocha, Clara, Luocha, and Blade. I'll talk about 1 more towards the end, but I just want to talk about broad logic so that this can last a really long time. You can just like mix and match as and when you want because that's how flexible of a character he really is. Slot 3 is really your debuffer or buffer, and what I'm talking about is characters like Ting Yun, Esther, you have Bronya in terms of your buffers, and other category will, for example, be like Pella, as well as characters like Silver Wolf or even Welt, for example. So in this category is very straightforward. You are buffing your team to do more damage. This category really is relying on Pella to do AoE break, so your AoE damage will be higher because the whole enemy's defense broken. Welt does speed down, which indirectly allows your characters to move more often. Welt definitely won't be as good with Clara because if the enemies don't attack her as often, her damage utility will drop. So I will just take her out of this picture so it doesn't confuse anyone right now. So Welt is going to be in terms of this slot 3 in terms of debuffing. You could run him here as well in terms of an AoE. So I'll put him like somewhere around here. You can choose which one you want to run him in. And Silver Wolf is really solid because you are able to implant weaknesses. Of course, it's going to be an expensive team to run, but I think one that is really nice will be, for example, Luocha. You can run Welt here, you can run Silver Wolf, and of course you can run Zealer here. Very, very well balanced team in terms of AoE damage from these 2 characters here. You have good amounts of solid single target from these 2 characters here, running a double imaginary, double quantum team. This will probably be one of my recommended teams as well if you can afford many 5 stars. And so yeah, those are my thoughts. I think the only team that probably, or only characters that won't really work very well with him will be characters like Gepard, Bailu, Natasha. You don't really need 2 healers, especially if you're running the Memory of Chaos and you need to DPS check to meet like a certain term requirement. Of course, if you're in the simulated universe and you want to do like a cheese strat of like maybe pure sustain, I think definitely you could find some value with multiple very strong defensive units. But by and large, Memory of Chaos, DPS check, I think you want to just run 1 healer as well. And if you found this video helpful, do like and subscribe for more of such future content. It will really help the channel grow. And do check out these 2 other videos which I think you might be interested in as well. Thanks so much for watching and see you in the next video.